Welcome to the Clear Admit MBA Admissions Academy. I'm Graham Richmond, and I'm with Alex Brown for this lesson on essays. And again, this one is going to be about popular questions. So, Alex, we did a popular questions lesson where we talked about career goals essays, because those are everywhere. But in this one, we're going to talk about a handful of different ones, right? So we have essays about achievements or accomplishments, essays about failure, leadership type essays, and teamwork. So those are really common themes that come time and time again. Some schools will say, tell us about 2 of your greatest accomplishments and 1 failure. I mean, there's all different flavors of this, but let's start with accomplishments.
Yeah.
And, first of all, how do you think about these? And are there any, frameworks, or how should someone go about setting out on one of these essays?
Well, again, as we referenced in an earlier lesson, the first thing you should have done is create your personal inventory. And if you've worked on that and sort of, in a very sort of robust fashion, you will have a set of experiences from which you can draw, and which of those experiences highlight the achievements of which you're most proud.
Yeah.
So the impact that you've had through those achievements. So they shouldn't be just achievements that personally enrich you, obviously. They should be achievements that have sort of wider impact on your communities around you, at work, maybe even outside of work, or whatever that might be. So I mean, these sorts of questions should be a great opportunity for you to really highlight truly who you are and sort of what you truly bring to the table. It's your proper storytelling piece of the application, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, as we again referenced earlier in a different lesson, using a framework like the STAR method or CAR method to sort of set the situation, the task, the actions, the results is always a useful tool to make sure you're covering all your bases. I personally, the accomplishments or achievements essays, those are fun.
Yeah.
They're easy to write because ideally, you've done your personal inventory, you have some things that you want to share that showcase interesting aspects of your background. On the flip side, though, there are a lot of schools that do ask about a failure or a mistake.
Yeah.
So, and these are tough. And I think the number of times I see candidates skirting these by writing about, the failure is really a veiled accomplishment story, So what are you looking for as an admissions reader when you're trying to...
So, failure, just make sure it is a failure, right? So you missed a deadline by a week, it's not going to count for this essay. And other sort of, like you say, the veiled failures that are actually successes. So I'm a workaholic, and this is how it managed. That's not going to work. So you're going to find an experience, and this might be an experience that was actually a little while ago now. So maybe you're less mature in your career, maybe it was your first year out of college, whatever it was, but we're always growing and learning. So you have an experience that doesn't work out as it should work out, and there's some substance to that failure. But the key then is that you've sort of grown from that experience, you've learnt from that experience, so there's some self-awareness there as well as growth. And then you've had a subsequent similar type of event or experience where you were successful because of what you learnt and experienced. So usually with a failure and mistake sort of type of an essay, you're going to tie it to an ultimate success.
Right.
But you're going to be very transparent about the early failure and not try to cover it up.
Agreed. And I think one of the things that I also see people doing is, even if they share a legitimate failure and they map it to a learning experience and a positive and maybe even a kind of a nice outcome at the end, sometimes there's a tendency to throw somebody under the bus in telling that story, right? So sort of, well, our team failed and it was really terrible, but it's because this boss that I had didn't know what he was doing, right? So what is that okay to do, or no?
No.
Yeah, I think really you got to
own your failures just like you own your successes. And clearly we're in a world where we've got to work together, and teamwork and all that's really important. And throwing someone under the bus is the antithesis of that. So that's just not going to resonate well at all.
Yeah. So agreed there. I think the last thing I would add on the failures front is it's important to avoid sharing like a catastrophic failure. Yeah. So it's sort of, and as you said, keep those failures ideally a little bit in the past. So you want to be like, well, actually just last week I lost $1 billion for the fund that I helped manage because I made a really dumb call on that would be really bad. So yeah, keep them in the past and ideally not catastrophic in terms of their magnitude.
And if you talk about nuance, you don't want the failure to be a result of a personal trait that can never change.
Right. Yeah, that's another excellent point. Yeah.
So it's about skills development. So if you've learned from that situation and you've developed the skill to a new situation, that's a good sort of example.
And you raise a great point, which is sometimes the best failure essays that I've read often point to the candidate having a self-awareness around maybe it's even part of the reason they want to come to business school, right? To study something that they're missing, that it would have helped fill in some of the gaps. So absolutely agree there. Now, there are a number of essays that are about leadership or teamwork. With that said, they often fall, I feel like sometimes they're almost like subcategories of an accomplishment or a failure, because it's often like, tell us about a time you excelled in a team, or tell us about a time that a team didn't work out. I mean, these are kind of accomplishments and failures too. Same with leadership. If they're asking you for a leadership example, that's sort of an accomplishment usually as well. But any tips or things that you want people to keep in mind?
I mean, usually with leadership, for example, people are like, well, you know what, I'm not managing anyone in the hierarchy at my organization, so I'm going to find it challenging to find a leadership example. I mean, honestly, that's not true. You can lead up, you can lead down, you can lead on a project. There's lots of different examples where you can clearly illustrate how you've driven something forward, basically, right? So you might not have had the authority necessarily on a hierarchical structure for that leadership role, but because of your tenacity and other attributes you brought to a project, you ended up being the person that drove it forward and stuff. And that's what you really want to get to. And to me, that's a better leadership than leadership through authority, right? Where people have to follow what you say because that's what the organization chart says, right? So leadership, teamwork. I mean, we're all sort of working in teams. You can lead the team from below, from above, whatever it might be.
Yeah. So I think the other thing that to keep in mind here, and you mentioned this sort of leadership opportunities. I think a lot about how sometimes people's go-to is work experience whenever they're asked for any of these types of, leadership, teamwork, failure. Yeah. But I want to just remind everyone that you can also go to extracurricular activities or community service, other things that have happened to you. And in fact, if you've already written an essay that's all about your work or some, work project, I think going back to what we said in an earlier lesson that we have in the academy here, this idea of balance across your essays. So, sometimes maybe there was a failure in, you were doing a fundraising effort and, for a community, organization or something, and there might have been a failure there. So there are lots of places you can go to for stories. And I just want to make sure that we underline that too, because I think, everything's fair game.
And again, it just goes, and I hate to keep repeating it, but it goes back to this notion of the importance of creating that personal inventory before you tackle any of the elements of the application. Because if you do that job thoroughly, then you'll be able to source lots of different examples from a nice balanced portfolio of stuff that you've done.
Yeah, agreed. So ideally, coming out of the personal inventory, you have a whole host of stories that can fit into any of these popular essay questions, whether it's achievements, failures, mistakes, teamwork, leadership, and so on. So up next, we're going to do a final lesson on essays. It's the 5th lesson on essays, and it's going to be, again, about some popular questions that we see.